I'm very happy to be joined by Kevin Cullinane, who is the interim group head of communications for the DAA, which covers both Dublin and Cork airports. Kevin, how are you?
I'm very good, Fionn.
I mean, you've been working at Cork for a long time. You filled in. We have seen the departure of Siobhan O'Donnell earlier the week, and then was it maybe a month or two ago? Paul O'Kane left the post. Both stalwarts of Dublin Airport. Big shoes to fill for yourself and Audrey O'Hagan.
I mean, last week we saw the departure of Siobhan from the business after 37 years of an illustrious career in communications and PR. And before that, as you say, a month ago, Paul O'Kane, who'd been with the organisation for almost 16 years. So huge corporate memory, huge experience to lose. I suppose the good news is I bring my own shoes to the role. They're a different size to what Siobhan and Paul might have worn. But look, we've gone through a seismic change as an industry in tourism and travel over the last 18 months. And sadly, we've lost and sadly seen over 1,000 of our staff in Dublin and Cork airports exit the business over the last while as we've tried to re-engineer our own business. So very sad to see two great colleagues leave the industry after sterling service. And obviously, I wish them well, and we'll be staying in touch with both of them.
So obviously, you're going to be the group in charge of communications. You have Audrey working in Dublin Airport. So what are the primary challenges for you both, particularly in relation to Dublin?
Well, I suppose we're essentially rebuilding our business back from ground zero after the pandemic. So one of the challenges there is obviously giving passengers up-to-date and reassuring messaging about what is now flying again and how the world is a little bit different to how people might have remembered it from the last time they've travelled. So a lot of our effort and energy has been put into obviously dealing with the pandemic over the last 18 months and, communicating the ever-changing dynamic of international travel, which, information was changing at a rate I've never witnessed in my career, and information that had a shelf life before of 6 months now had maybe at most 6 hours. So it's been a challenge to keep on top of that and to keep communicating, because again, people were using dublinairport.com and corkairport.com and social media channels as a conduit to fielding all of their questions about travel, and a lot of it was government regulations and regulations here in Ireland and abroad, and how that was impacting on travel. So, we've been doing a lot of work, particularly on our social media channels and our feedback channels, to do that. And now we're moving into a new era where hopefully we're seeing the start of the restoration and the rebuilding of our connectivity out of Dublin and Cork as well. Which is good news to be sharing with people again about the number of routes and the number of airlines that are restoring routes and building capacity back up in the system. So that's going to be, I suppose, our focus for the short to medium term going forward.
Sure. During the seemingly endless lockdown and restrictions, one of the things that the occasional newspaper article would come out and I would say all these thousands of people who are travelling illegally through Dublin Airport. And I remember speaking to Paul O'Kane about it, and he certainly made no secret of his frustration at the idea that was presenting a very false picture of what life was like in the airport. And then since we look at figures put out by IATA and others that say that Dublin Airport was literally, if not the absolute quietest European capital airport in Europe, it was certainly in the top 3. So can you give us an idea of how devastating the last 18 months has been to traffic through Dublin Airport?
I think anyone who'd been through the terminal buildings at the depths of the pandemic, it was like the Mary Celeste. I mean, very few retail outlets open, very few check-in desks open, very few staff on the ground because there were so few flights flying. And the only people who were flying were genuinely flying for absolutely essential reasons. At the early stages, it was to repatriate with their own kith and kin abroad. Obviously, inbound flights were bringing Irish people that were stranded abroad, all 4 corners of the globe, that wanted to get home. And equally, then, we had the whole, I suppose, public service obligation to get PPE into the country, and the sterling work that was done by Aer Lingus in particular, bringing those cargo flights from China in. And we kind of forgot all about that, about all of the other ancillary roles that the airport plays, because everyone associates the airport with probably the good time they have heading out on holiday or a long weekend. But people travel for a variety of reasons, and we had a lot of essential workers that came home to be on the front line of our health service. So the airports were extremely quiet. I mean, on some days, you could have counted on the fingers of your two hands the number of passengers going through Cork, and certainly there were days when we had less than 100 passengers in total going through Dublin Airport. So, from buildings, this time of year ordinarily we'd be filling, the equivalent of Croke Park 2 times over every day, 100,000 plus passengers going through T1 and T2. We've missed that. We've missed that buzz this year. But look, people, I think since the lifting of the restrictions on July 19th, we are seeing a slow but gradual recovery in passenger numbers, and that's given obviously our airline customers the confidence to put flights and capacity back into the system.
I want to say, I travelled through Dublin Airport yesterday, and I never thought I'd say this, but the delight I felt in seeing the queues at the car rental desks on the 3rd floor of T2, and even more is the snaking queue to go through the security, and I was thinking, oh my God, this is amazing to see people actually traveling through the airport. However, as you point out, you're looking, the numbers that should be going through in August, in the height of summer, is a hell of a lot more than what we're seeing. So when you said steady, slow recovery, how slow, how steady are we really talking?
Well, it's really since July 19th we've seen that, gradually increase. So, before that we were at, like 13% of 2019 levels in the week prior to reopening. We had about 111,000 passengers going through. That built up to about 24% of 2019 levels, with about 193,000 passengers go through the week. The restrictions were lifted. And then last week, we were up at 275,000 passengers for the week. Now that's the equivalent of 2 days in a normal August day pre-pandemic. So we're reaching about 35% of 2019 levels right now, and we'll see that kind of plateau out after this month, as obviously the traditional summer holiday season ends and schools reopen. Cork similarly, has doubled from about 7% of 2019 levels to about 16% over the period of restrictions being lifted, and had a good week last week. I think Cork had about 16,000 passengers. When you consider Cork would have been doing 10,000 passengers a day, so it's still significantly down where we ordinarily would be at, but it's a marked improvement, and the growth has been exponential really since July 19th, and we're seeing that week on week going forward. So it is a slow but gradual recovery, and we're back up to 35 airlines now operating out of Dublin Airport again. So, and we'll see a few more coming back in the next 4 weeks or so. So capacity
which is very important, and European carriers are upping their services. I saw Emirates are going to bulk up their service again within the next few weeks. So you have service to Europe, service to the Middle East. Transatlantic service out of Dublin is hugely significant. It's coming in because American visitors can come to the EU so long as they've been double vaccinated. But to date, we Europeans can't travel to the United States. So clearly the lifting of the travel ban on the part of the Biden administration is fundamental to the future fortunes of the airport.
Hugely so. This month we saw, Air Canada and Delta restore services, and again, it was great to see Washington coming back on the Aer Lingus network, adding to the other, traditional strongholds that they'd have in Boston, New York, Philly, and so forth. But there's a lot of political lobbying, I believe, going on at the moment, particularly amongst the EU, and a lot of nations are quite vocal on this, that they want to see, the restrictions lifted into the US, as Europe has embraced, the lifting of restrictions from US citizens coming here. So, there's speculation that may happen early next month. We'll wait and see, but it will be very important, obviously, for both leisure and indeed business, given the proliferation of US multinationals that have a presence here in Ireland, particularly in pharma, biopharma, ICT sectors. They want to get execs traveling again and need to meet customers and need to get head office contact restored. So, we all are looking eagerly forward to seeing that US connectivity rebuilding and rebounding back better in the weeks and months ahead.
If they were to announce a lifting of the ban on European visitors coming into the United States, what kind of time frame would the airport need in order to ramp up its services to pre-pandemic levels so that it could then service the kind of demand that there would be to get into the United States?
We're very ready at the moment. We've had a readiness team and project team in situ now for a number of weeks and indeed months before that, because if you remember last year, we were all kind of geared up for July 1st last year, and we were calling it internally this notional day zero of the restart, and it didn't happen, obviously, for obvious reasons. We reviewed our plans earlier at the start of the summer, so we've been gradually ramping up our operation and our staffing levels accordingly. So we're more than prepared. We have all the measures in place. And again, the last number of weeks have, as I say, numbers have been doubling week on week, literally. So that's given us, a really strong test to test the systems and test the processes, because things are slightly different. And as you say, people are trying to maintain social distance in the terminals. They're trying to get used to a whole plethora of new administration that they have to go through before they even board, to make sure that they have their digital COVID cert in situ, that they've got their passenger locator form done, and all of those additional admin elements. So in fairness, people are taking the time to be prepared. They're doing a little bit more of due diligence, a little bit more pre-planning in advance of travel, and that's good, because that's making the passenger journey through our terminals certainly a lot more seamless than it might have been otherwise. Obviously, we've seen some of the footage from other airports in Europe where the experience hasn't been as good as it's been in Dublin and Cork. So, I think it's been a largely positive experience. And as those passenger numbers start to ramp up, we're certainly prepared for the advent of more transatlantic passengers coming back through our terminals.
Which is all very good news. In the last few months, we have seen the establishment of the new Aer Lingus base, or Aer Lingus UK, out of Manchester, with transatlantic services to New York, to Orlando, next year to Boston. This autumn, they're going to have a direct flight to the Caribbean. What is the impact of a new Manchester base on Dublin Airport, given the fact that Dublin Airport has cemented its position as being one of the key transit airports for travel, for transatlantic travel to the United States?
Well, I think it's important to recognise, both Aer Lingus and indeed Ryanair, as the two Irish home-based carriers, serve more than 80% of the passengers flying out of Dublin and Cork Airport annually, and that still remains so. At the moment, the equilibrium is a little bit, out of kilter because of COVID. So at the moment, Ryanair carrying about 57% of the passengers going through Dublin, Aer Lingus about 20%, and the other 23% is being covered by a variety of the other airlines, of the other 30 or so airlines that are operating. So, but Dublin does remain an important hub for Aer Lingus, and as part of their long-term strategy, and you can even see that with the announcement recently about the alliance with Emerald Airlines, filling the gap left by Stobart Air. So using Dublin as a hub for that UK connecting passenger that wants to fly transatlantic, it's a seamless product going through Dublin. So I think, in the short term, yes, aircraft have been redeployed to Manchester, and Aer Lingus, as part of the wider IAG group, has done that for their own strategic reasons. But, we're very confident that Dublin will remain a central plank of the Aer Lingus strategy going forward.
So Dub Hub isn't going anywhere?
Not going anywhere. Certainly, Dublin is very important. I think we were very reassured to hear that message reiterated last week, or recent days, in terms of the strategic alliance and the rebuilding of the Aer Lingus regional network into Dublin going forward. So that's a development that we welcome, and we're looking forward to seeing the connectivity from UK provincial cities into Dublin and indeed Cork in the months ahead.
Just on to Cork. So the announcement that Cork Airport will be closed for 3 months during the autumn, so for this restoration of the runway, these huge runway repairs that are going to happen, dare I say, it caused some disquiet in the industry, not least with one airline in particular who made their feelings very vocal, very known at how unhappy they were, and they were very critical of airport authorities. So I guess the question is, was it not possible to have the repairs done sooner, i.e. when the airport was much quieter, and why is that not the case?
Well, what's happening in Cork is essentially we're bringing forward a planned investment that was going to happen at the end of next year and into 2023. We brought that forward at the end of last summer because we could obviously see the decimating impact that COVID was having on our business. So we're actually going to be investing 40 million euro this year in the infrastructure at Cork. The main runway, the only jet-capable runway at Cork, is at the end of its shelf life. Runways of that nature last 15 to 20 years. We've sweated the asset, part of that asset, for 20 years, and the extension of the runway for 30 years. So it's well due a reconstruction. So we're essentially rebuilding the main runway in Cork. One option was we wait till the end of next year and the following year, and we do it at night time when normal operations have been restored. That would have meant closing the airport at 10 o'clock at night, bringing all the equipment, all of the trucks, all of the asphalt on site up to 11 o'clock, and having a window between 11 o'clock and 4 a.m. to do the work, then getting everything off again before a 5 a.m. start for our first departure to Amsterdam at 6 a.m. And we would have had to done that every night for 9-10 months.
Okay.
The alternative was bring it forward as quickly as possible. First of all, we have to get the funding in place, and with nothing coming into the tills over the last while, we had a challenge to obviously get the funding in place, and we were very grateful that the government also announced pre-Christmas a 10 million injection towards that investment. And then we had, obviously, given the size of the investment that was going into that, we had to go through a very rigorous and robust EU procurement process. So we've appointed Colas International to do the work. A lot of the preparatory work has been going on in the last number of weeks, and we'll be shovel ready to start the middle of September. And over a very tight 10-week period, we will essentially rebuild the main runway at Cork, and we'll be out of there again by the 22nd of November, ready for the Christmas period and the rebounding of international travel that we forecast for next year. So doing it over 10 weeks is certainly preferable to doing it over 10 months. It's also a lot safer and it's a lot cheaper. But none of us could have foreseen a global pandemic coming down the runway at us, at the outset. But what we did do last summer was bring the whole project forward, get all of the design, the planning, the funding in place, and expedite. And from the time of getting funding to the time of completing the project, we'll have done all of that in a 12-month window. I think it's unheard of in European aviation circles. And we've also taken the opportunity over the last number of months to do a bit of, best practice and know-how transfer with other airports around Europe, over 20 indeed. We've been doing workshops with other airports to learn from them of their experience and do it as quickly and as fast as possible. And in the main, all of our airline customers agree with that strategy. It's much more preferable to do it this way than to be discommoding passengers next year when obviously travel will be at a height. Bearing in mind, this year Cork will only do about 200,000 passengers versus the 3 million it should be doing in a normal year.
Yeah.
We'll discommode 10% of 200,000 this year versus discommoding 10% of what we anticipate to be about 1.5 million passengers next year. So it means less people are affected, less flights are affected. We do it cheaper, safer and quicker.
Performative anger by an airline? No, that couldn't be the case at all. I can say that. One last question. Again, as I said, I was traveling through the airport. It was nice to see it busier than it had been for 18 months. But still, a lot of the retail outlets remain closed. The fast track lanes are all closed, etc. So when do you think that we will see the airport back up with the full range of services that it has to offer?
It's slowly but gradually ramping up. So fast track is back, for example, and back in flow. And what you're starting to see is obviously more of the food and beverage outlets have reopened. They're hugely dependent, obviously, on footfall going through the terminals. So when there was next to nothing going through, it just, they unfortunately had to furlough a lot of their staff because there just wasn't the business there for them to stay open. So at this stage, a lot of our food and beverage offerings have reopened. The Loop at Dublin in T1, T2 and Cork has remained open throughout all of this.
Yes.
And interesting, we're seeing that the average passenger spend for passengers that are travelling has increased because I think people have missed, the offer that and the great value that obviously the Loop offers for international travellers departing Ireland. And more of the concessionaires are coming back on stream. Car hire companies, for example, largely stayed open because they were serving essential travellers and the Gardaí and the HSE through their facilities at the airports over the last while. So I think, by the start of the summer season, or the traditional summer season next March, the end of next March, I think you'll largely see, a lot of the property restored to pre-pandemic levels, hopefully. But as we know with this pandemic, it's had many twists and turns since. So look, fingers crossed as the vaccination program rolls out and people have the restored confidence to travel again. And we're certainly seeing it. Like, the UK is our number one destination at the moment, very followed by Spain, Portugal. So people have had the confidence to get in a summer holiday and a break that they've probably well earned at this stage. And obviously, US travel is slowly coming back in one direction at the moment, and hopefully will ramp up in both directions very, very soon.
Kevin Cullinane, Interim Group Head of Communications for the DAA. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Always a pleasure, Fionn.